Adar Weinreb. Thank you for joining me in the trenches. I apologize, as I said earlier, for my makeshift setup. My studio is still being built. I have moved house, and I'm also using my backup mic and camera. So, okay, what is your background?
So my background is quite varied. At age 18, I moved from New Jersey to Israel, officially making Aliyah, which is our word for Aliyah means to go up, which is what it's called when Jews immigrate to Israel. And I did so out of ideological reasons. I was raised with deep Zionist teachings, my father being ninth generation Israeli, meaning my family immigrated to Ottoman Palestine in 1812. And from a young age, it was put in my head that when I turn 18, I'll make Aliyah and join the IDF, like my grandfather, like my father, like my uncles. It's what you're meant to do if you're a proud Zionist. I was also a big troublemaker growing up, so I figured the IDF would straighten me up a little bit. So at age 18, that's exactly what I did. I joined the IDF. I served there 3 years. And interestingly, my time in the IDF is when I started to have a minor shift in my perspective. I was guarding on base, and the soldiers, we're all primarily ages 18 to 21. Most of us don't really want to be there. We're bored out of our mind. We don't like being in that system where we don't have freedom. It's physically hard. It's emotionally hard. But anyways, I'm guarding, and I'm just bored out of my mind. And there's a poster on the wall of different Hamas training techniques. So, I'm reading the poster, looking at these, was just reading the poster, and there's a photo of Hamas crawling through sand. And I looked at one of these Hamas militants, and I'd been crawling through sand that very same day. So I looked at him, and I kind of saw myself in him. He's crawling through sand. I was crawling through sand. And I started asking myself, is the biggest difference between us dependent on what side of this imaginary line we were born on? Does his family view him as a hero and me as a terrorist? Can that be? Now, this didn't change my views overnight. Deep-rooted, fear-based teachings don't change overnight, and sometimes they don't change in a lifetime. But this certainly planted a seed in my mind. And then in the years after getting released from the IDF, I started my mind opened up. I wasn't in this institution of the military where you're kind of forced to see things a certain way. And that seed that was planted grew into the ideology I hold today, which is the difference between us is really dependent on where we were born in. Had I been in the shoes of a Hamas militant, I would see the world as they see it. And so that the path to peace comes through recognizing this and comes through the humanization of the other. So I started, this was in around 2014 during the Gaza operation. And I saw two distinct narratives online: Gaza under attack, Israel under attack. No one was saying Israel and Gaza under attack. No one was focusing on the humanity of both sides and how civilians of both sides are suffering. And the whole both sides conversation is triggering to many. We could get deeper into that. When is an appropriate use of both sides and when it's not? Because most people don't have a nuanced take on it. They just reflexively, they hear both sides and they get triggered. So we could get into that. But I started just writing Facebook posts about how we're all suffering, just talking about the commonality between us. And obviously this triggered people. I learned very quickly when you humanize someone's enemy, you become the enemy. But a lot of people were appreciative of it. And then I just stuck with it. So since 2014, on and off, I've been involved in different peace building initiatives, helping NGOs with their promotion and marketing. And during COVID, I launched a YouTube channel that I still run today, where I do live stream conversations, bringing Israelis and Palestinians together. This has always been just a passion of mine. I am an entrepreneur. That's been my main focus since, I guess, 2015 or so. So after the IDF, I actually became a club promoter in Tel Aviv. I explained the activism track, but what I've been doing alongside that, after the IDF, I became one of Tel Aviv's top club promoters, believe it or not. Started building and managing my own teams. I then, once I had connections at the clubs, I started managing DJs. And then I launched, through that, I met one of Israel's top music producers. We launched a record label and a music tech startup. And then I actually, a few weeks ago, finally sold this music startup. But I'm in the subsequent years, since 2018 until 2022, I've launched between 2018 and 2025, I've launched 2 other startups. One called Grateful Giraffes, which is a global community primarily based out of LA. And then more recently, Headon.ai, which is my newest company, which is a platform we're building designed to connect people for productive conversations. So the idea is to scale civil discourse using AI. So essentially what I'm trying to do on YouTube, we're trying to build technology that can do that without a facilitator per se. So my background is part entrepreneurship, part activism, and now for the first time in my adult life, I'm able to connect my activism and my entrepreneurship because Head-On is directly connected to conversations. So as of the past few months, I've been much more active on Twitter. I've been much more active on YouTube because I'm able to justify it also from a business perspective. So it's still a passion of mine, but it's also part of I've been able to connect it to my work, and I'm immensely grateful that I can now be doing this, something I'm very passionate about, for work.
Do you think it's a bottomless pit, though?
I don't think it's a bottomless pit. I think there's 2 ways to look at peace building, or probably more than 2 ways, but one is just grassroots. It's humans finding ways to better communicate ideas and find common ground. The world today is more connected than ever before digitally, but ideologically we're likely more divided than we've ever been. And it's interesting, social media is playing a role in this division that we're seeing. So while internet has been great for humanity in many ways, and in a sense connected us, it has also contributed to our division. So we're looking to build technology that can take the beauty of social media and internet that creates global connectivity, but build it in a way that doesn't bring out the worst in people. If you spend time on Twitter, you're seeing the worst in people, myself included. You know, I'm very rarely an asshole in real life, but on Twitter, I'm an asshole often. So something about that medium is just not bringing out the best in us. So there's a technological solution to change that. And this is well beyond Israel-Palestine. Every country in the world has their own internal conflict. There's many international conflicts. It could be India, Pakistan, Russia, Ukraine. It could be Democrats and Republicans in the US. There's no end for division, and we currently don't have a great way to communicate and find common ground. So we're trying to solve that using technology and AI. But beyond just humans communicating, I do think that the best ways to create global shifts is to transform our institutions. And part of doing this is through us communicating around ideas, building consensus. But the solution to Israel-Palestine is not just Israelis and Palestinians, talking. It's how do we transform the institutions that govern the land to be institutions that can protect the rights of all people living between the river and the sea? And these institutions could be shared, which would look like a one-state paradigm, or we could have separate institutions that would be more like a two-state paradigm, but they need to be transformed in such a way that our rights are protected. And currently, the institutions that govern the land protect the rights of half the population and not the other half. So that's the transform we need to work to create. So part of this happens from grassroots activism, us getting to know each other, but we can't just focus on finding common ground. We also need to work to change the system that governs the land.
People don't really know what's going on. That's the issue.
Yeah. And it's been getting worse. You would think the age of the internet. I mean, before the internet, we really just relied on our institutions primarily to tell us what's true, like media. And I imagine they've never been fully transparent and as honest as we'd hope they should be, or as honest and transparent as we deserve. But right now we're overwhelmed with information and misinformation that it's very hard to know what's true. I'm hoping there will be some kind of an AI solution to truth telling, but this is not something we are personally working on. A good friend of mine, Sar Wilf, is working on he has a company called Root Claim. They do probabilistic analyses on contested issues, and they're working to build AI to solve this problem. He tells me that they're making progress. But yeah, it's a major issue. So some of the work I've been doing since October 7th, I divide my work into a few things. One is humanizing both sides. The other is criticizing institutions that need to change. So as of late, it's been primarily criticizing the IDF in Israel, because these are the institutions that are harming the most people by far, at least in the sphere I'm interested in. And third, I've been doing is research and analyses. So I've done a lot of work trying to provide clarity on the real death toll in Gaza, on the extent to war crimes being committed. I've put out some stuff, a little bit about some lies I believe Israel has told, and also some trying to set the record straight on what happened on October 7th and what didn't. All these issues, there's massive misinformation. It's hard to know what's true. So this is something I've been actively working and doing my small part. I feel like I've made a little bit of a difference. I do see a lot of people use my analyses as references. They're constantly sharing them. So it seems to have shifted the narrative a little bit, but I feel like I still could have done more. You know, the fact that there's still so much misinformation, maybe I'm being hard on myself, but whenever I see these prevalent false claims, I'm like, damn, I wasn't as successful as I wish I could have been.
Well, you got detained recently, didn't you?
Yeah, I was detained 3-4 weeks ago. Me and a group of 20 others did a march to the Gaza border in an attempt to break the siege. We go knowing they're not going to let us go close, but it's a symbolic act, right? It's to show the world a group of Israelis are meeting to defy the authorities, walking towards Gaza. And they didn't let us get too far. The second we left the train station, they already started blocking the sidewalk. We started pushing through them. And then those who were kind of front and center, they detained us all. It wasn't an arrest, it was a detention. So we were just in a cell for 6 hours. We did get mugshots and fingerprints and all that. We did get an interrogation. And then we had to sign that we won't return to the Gaza border for 2 weeks, or else we'd be arrested and charged on the spot. But yeah, that was a cool experience.
What's it like since October 7 being a Jew?
Yeah, I mean, I am not the average Jew experiencing things right now, but I certainly sympathize with what Jews are experiencing. You could only imagine what it feels like to see the world turning on you, not only on you as a people, but a country that you have deep love for, being viewed as the worst villain of this century. It's definitely not easy. It comes with a lot of pain. It comes with a lot of fear. So yeah, it's, anti-Semitism is skyrocketing, not only because of Israel's actions. Twitter is also, or I guess since it's been X, is also contributing greatly to anti-Semitism with just allowing conspiracies and false claims and hateful people to propagate ideas. And I don't support censorship, but in this free marketplace of ideas, it's not that the best ideas win. It's that the most sensationalized ideas and simplistic ideas win. So while I don't support censorship, I do support building platforms that have a way to give more reach to better ideas and less reach to worse ideas. But between, the proliferation of conspiracies and hateful rhetoric online, and then the atrocities being committed by the Jewish state in the name of protecting Jews, while the majority of the world's Jews are supporting these actions, there's no world in which that doesn't fuel anti-Semitism. And this is very controversial. Jews get very upset when I say this, but people respond to stuff like this. None of us are born hateful. We become hateful based on our experience. And if people are seeing videos of dead children, dismembered children in Gaza, and they see the majority of Jews they're interacting with online are somehow trying to justify this, that impacts how you view Jews. It just does. So this isn't about blaming. I'm not into blame. I'm just into recognizing reality for what it is and seeing if we could find ways to solve it. But it's definitely a scary time for Jews. It's a challenging time for Jews. And I think in general, the way it's being approached is not only not productive, it's counterproductive. So if you look at the mainstream voices fighting anti-Semitism, not only have they not made any difference in reducing anti-Semitism, I think they're more likely to have increased it. They're entirely counterproductive in their approach to fighting anti-Semitism. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think once the dust settles in Gaza and the bloodshed ends, I'm going to focus more on doing commentary on anti-Semitism and building bridges with anti-Semites. I think that's the approach, not canceling them, not deplatforming them, not assuming the worst about their intentions, but seeing them as humans that are maybe misguided and misinformed and trying to build bridges. That's the approach I would like to take. I'm just too busy with Israel-Palestine stuff now, so I'm not touching it, but I do plan on doing it at some point. And again, this might be a problem with our social media, that the extreme voices are what we hear and see. The moderate, sensible voices, they're not going as viral, they're not getting as much reach. So we're seeing the extremes. It's perceived as if these are the mainstream ideas, and that helps make them mainstream. So, whether one side is calling for the ethnic cleansing of, right? Like here's two popular positions depending on what side you're on: ethnically cleansing Palestinians or ethnically cleansing Jews. Neither of these are fringe positions. These are two positions that we should, by default, say is unacceptable. Ethnic cleansing is just removing people en masse from their homes and getting rid of them is not a legitimate position. We should just be able to agree on that. But these are two, I don't know if mainstream's correct because I'd need to see polling, but at least if you're existing online, they seem to be mainstream positions, and they're certainly not fringe ideas anymore.
There's also what appears to be a confusion between being Jewish, being a Zionist, and being an Israeli.
Yes, for sure. I don't like the term Zionism. I don't think it serves any purpose. It's a term that causes more confusion than it provides clarity. Jews say it just means our right to self-determination on our ancestral homeland. Anti-Zionists say it's akin to Jewish supremacy. And again, neither's wrong, because true Zionism is our right to self-determination, but the way we've self-determined has been a system of supremacy. So both are correct, but one uses it as an inherently positive term. For the other, it's a pejorative. And if it simply means the right to Jewish self-determination, why does that require a term? I support Jewish self-determination, and I support Palestinian self-determination. Supporting Palestinian self-determination doesn't have a special term. If I support Kurdish self-determination, that doesn't have a term. The term does not need to exist. It's just, and now it's used as a slur, right? That's a Zionist, and it's often used interchangeably with Jew. So I want to get rid of the term Zionism. It's just meaningless, causes confusion, provides no utility in conversation. Jew and Israeli, yeah, those are two separate things. Jew is a ethno-religious group, and Israeli is 80% of Israelis are Jewish, but the other 20% are Muslim, and then some amount are Christian. Yeah, And because we're not, Judaism is not just a religion, it's a people as well. A significant portion of Jews do not believe in the Jewish religion. Like, I don't believe in the Jewish religion. I'm Jewish, but I'm an agnostic, right? I believe that the Torah is not the word of God. I believe it's written by humans, but I'm still Jewish. So that's a little clarity on how to look at it. Yeah. But if we want to use the term Zionism, overwhelmingly Jews are Zionists. Most Jews believe that Jews deserve the right to self-determine on their ancestral homeland. But now there is a growing number of Jews, primarily in the United States, but I think in populations around the world, that are starting to say that Israel is not a necessity. If this is what Israel looks like, if this is what Jewish self-determination looks like, then I don't support it. I think there's a growing number of people who feel that way.
What do you think?
So again, the way I look at it is, how can we protect the rights of the people? So right now you have a situation where you have around 5-6 million Jews living in the land between the river and the sea. You have around that same number of Palestinians. They all deserve to have their rights protected. I see ways to do that while keeping the Jewish state alongside a Palestinian state, but I also see ways to do that without a Jewish state, transforming it into a federation, the Federation of Israel and Palestine. So I consider myself solution agnostic. I don't think a Jewish state needs to exist, but I am not in complete opposition to it, because again, I don't think of it in those terms. For me, it's, how do we protect the rights of the people? If you could do that with a Jewish state next to a Palestinian state, great. If you could do that without a Jewish state, great. That's how I tend to look at it. So I don't identify as a Zionist, but I also don't identify as an anti-Zionist.
Yes, but you're an Israeli, and you're very close to the action. I mean, what's happening in Gaza is right next door, isn't it?
Yeah. A few hours away. I'm here in the north, in the Western Galilee, but it's just a few hours away. Like, if I were to get in a car, I could be at the Gaza border in probably 3 hours. Yeah.
The term that gets thrown around is genocide. That was the term used by South Africa when they took Israel to the ICJ.
Yeah. So the term genocide is another term that I think there's a lot of confusion around. For Jews, our frame of reference for genocide is the Holocaust. So we find it to be deeply triggering when people use that term, especially when it's used about our actions. And what's happening in Gaza is not like the Holocaust. So there's a strong reaction and rejection of that term by most Jews. They say, what do you mean it's not a genocide? And then their understanding of a genocide is trying to kill the entire population, or as much of the population, as quickly as possible. When you look at the definition of genocide, it's not that simple. It's killing a population in whole or in part, and then there's other criteria that need to be met.
It's very fuzzy.
It is fuzzy, and it's up for interpretation. It's also hard to prove in court. That's why the ICJ could not proving intent is very hard. Now, when you do look at Israel's actions, I don't think using the term genocide is a stretch. I do think it's a reasonable description of what's happening in Gaza. But I also recognize that it's something that we could debate. It's not like it's 100% a genocide, there's no room for debate. No, I do think there's room for debate, but I have no objection to people describing it as a genocide. I sometimes refer to it as a genocide. I often don't, though, and the reason for it is what I described is it's deeply triggering, and a lot of my viewers are Jews, and it shuts down otherwise meaningful conversation.
Yeah, it's also very loaded.
Yeah, and I don't care for the debate on terminology. I try to get rid of these words that will get us caught up in debates on terminology. I call it an atrocity. I call it as morally indefensible. I call it as the mass killing of civilians. These are much if you think it is defensible, let's discuss why you think it's defensible, why I don't. But I don't care about why it's genocide, why it's not. To me, it's just not, it's a distraction. So I certainly understand why Israelis and why Jews object to the term, but I also very much understand why it's widely called a genocide. And while intent is hard to prove in court, there's a growing consensus amongst academics and scholars of genocide that this is a genocide based on their interpretation of events. And they don't need to prove intent in court. This is them looking at the situation and reaching a conclusion. And just to give like an analogy, a quick analogy, sometimes there's somebody who is innocent because they're like in court, they're innocent because the evidence we just couldn't compile the right evidence, whatever, but people still know that they're guilty. So there's the court of law and the court of public opinion, and the court of public opinion overwhelmingly is seeing this as a genocide, and even those who don't want to use the term are seeing this as something that is morally indefensible. And I do agree with them that it's morally indefensible.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask you. That was my question. What is going on there?
So first, let's just talk about what a challenging fighting conditions Gaza is, right? So let's be very, very charitable towards Israel for a moment and say their goal is to destroy Hamas and not to get rid of the Gazan people. I think their motivation is both, and they're not shy in this goal, right? Israel has been saying since day one they want to destroy Hamas, but Israel, whether it's Netanyahu or people in his cabinet, on multiple occasions have made their aspiration to relocate Gazans very clear. So I think it's very fair to assume that their goal is both. But even if their goal is to just defeat Hamas, that's a nearly impossible task. This is something I've been saying since days after October 7th, that our chance of success in Gaza, of defeating Hamas, is very low. But the cost in trying is going to be very high. It's for this reason I did not support the aerial bombardments and Israel's operation from day one. Even as horrific as October 7th was, I assessed that the chance of success is low, the cost will be very high. Now, when we look at, and so why is it tough conditions? Hamas has had decades to build a tunnel city under Gaza, while civilians are on top, living on top of Gaza. Tunnel warfare is very dangerous and very difficult. Israel we don't like losing our own soldiers. No one does. So we're risk averse. We're not going to go tunnel to tunnel. The only solution is massive aerial bombardments. But at massive aerial bombardments, in a densely populated city, while civilians have not had proper evacuations, and while Hamas has where to hide, is a particularly preposterous and barbaric strategy. Like we just accept, and I want, part of my activism is I want it to be as hard as possible to kill innocent people. This is something we widely agree upon in society. Humans have an inalienable right to life. We even debate if we should take this right away from criminals, right? Capital punishment is something that's widely debated in society. But when it comes to war, suddenly we have a category called collateral damage, which are humans that got their right to life taken from them. But we see it as just whatever, it happens, it's war, we can kill them. I think part of us making moral progress and being able to protect the rights of all people, including the rights of Jews and Israelis, is building systems and institutions and a moral understanding that killing civilians is wrong and should always be done as a last resort. But so Israel's approach has been massive aerial bombardments on a densely populated city that's not properly evacuated, literally incinerating full families, killing massive amounts of children, while Hamas is not being defeated by this. That is not something that we should accept as legitimate or okay. That is the mass killing of civilians with not all too much to show from a perspective of military gain. So yes, we need to say You cannot do this to a civilian population. This is unacceptable. It's illegal and it's immoral. That's my position in Gaza. And in addition to just the aerial campaigns that have not taken nearly enough consideration for civilian life, there's been a systematic destruction of their water system, dismantling of their healthcare system, very low degree of care for civilians, despite what some of the pro-Israel propagandists are claiming. Large swaths of Gaza are turned into what they call no-go zones, where some units get a command to just shoot anyone on sight, even if it's a woman and a child. We know units are doing this. The less extreme units are not shooting anyone on sight. They're just shooting any man on sight, but even if they're unarmed. So yeah, this is perhaps sometimes war is inevitable and we need it, but we need to understand that war is horrific and we need to do everything in our power to protect civilians in war, and that's not happening. It's not even close to happening.
But Adar, Israel is just defending itself.
Israel is just defending itself the same way as Hamas was just resisting on October 7th. There's resistance that's legitimate, and then resistance that's not. There's self-defense that's legitimate and self-defense that's not. Palestinians have the right to resist. October 7th was not legitimate. Israel has a right to self-defense. Our response to October 7th is not legitimate. It's easy to hide behind those terms, right? But we need to, just because Israel has a right to self-defense doesn't mean everything we do in the name of self-defense should be seen as okay. You could take that to any extent. Let's just nuke Gaza. We're just defending ourselves, right? And that's what many supporters of October 7th use a similar logic. It's not for me to tell oppressed people how to resist. They should do everything in their power to liberate themselves. I think these are both incorrect positions. You know, as I mentioned, I split up the work I do. So part of what I'm doing is engaging in the humanization process. So, for example, a few weeks ago, I was involved in a 200-person Palestinian-Israeli camping trip in the West Bank. So that's very much
camping in the West Bank.
Yeah. West Bank. You know, I call it West Bank, Judea, Samaria, Palestine. I like to even that I consider. Like Judea and Samaria, that's the ancestral name for it. But often people who use that term today are doing so in an attempt to erase Palestinian claim to land. So I call it Judea and Samaria, Palestine.
And how did it go?
It triggers people on both sides, and it receives appreciation from people on both sides. So. And look, I like to do that. I like to try to think how we could frame these things in ways that are just a little bit more accurate and that speak to both sides. So I consider Zionism is an indigenous rights movement, but it's also a form of settler colonialism. Both are true. But the picnic was great. You know, it's all just seeing us come together, getting to know one another. It really, those moments give us hope. So yeah, I'm going to continue doing that work. But I think that our populations are now so radicalized that I don't have high hope that a solution will come purely from within. I think one of the best ways for us to solve the conflict is for the U.S. to stop being an enabler for Israel's human rights abuses. And
that's a big point.
So the U.S. certainly acts as an enabler. And the trajectory of the U.S. population is becoming more and more anti-Israel. And this is concerning to many Israelis, and understandably so, but this is a positive trajectory. Because it's not going to go to the point where the U.S. goes from Zionist to anti-Zionist overnight. You're going to have this generational grace period where, and this is an assumption, but this is what I perceive will happen, where politicians will understand that they just can't be blindly supportive of Israel. They need to be more nuanced. They will need to, in order for them to be relevant, they will need to say, either Israel has the right to exist, or I won't support any solution that puts Jews in dangers, right? That's appealing to one side. But on the other, Israel needs to do X, Y, Z to solve the conflict. They can't keep expanding territories. They can't keep this system of oppression. They can't be violating these human rights. That is what I want the U.S. political establishment to how I want them to view it, and to put necessary pressure on Israel to make the concessions needed for a long-term and just solution to the conflict. So I'm focusing, yes, on peace building from within, but I'm also focusing on trying to convince Americans that we're not the most moral army in the world, and what we're doing in the West Bank is wrong. So that is very much an active part of my activism.
Would you argue that it is understandable why there is a strong support for Hamas within Gaza?
So recent polling doesn't show the support to be strong. It's the past few polls have showed like high single digit, low single digit support for Hamas. And the reason for this is they see what Hamas has brought upon them with October 7th. But historically, I can understand why Hamas has been popular.
They represented an idea.
Yeah, and they've been shown to be effective. So one of the biggest mistakes Israel made was not rewarding moderation. The Palestinian Authority, who used to be more extreme than Hamas when they were the PLO, through negotiation, moderated their stance, and in 1993 recognized Israel's right to exist. And for over 2 decades now, we have had security cooperation with the PA. The PA helps Israel stop terror attacks in the West Bank. What was the reward for this moderated stance? Settlement expansion, more theft of land, more checkpoints, a more serious system of oppression. Palestinians see that compromise and moderation does not work. And when Hamas used violence against Israel in Gaza, we withdrew from Gaza. So Israelis or Palestinians see moderation as not being effective, but violence being effective. Israel very much reinforced this with their actions, with not rewarding. What we should have done is spent the past 2 decades showing the Palestinians that if you work with us, that is the path to statehood. That is the path to sovereignty. But we did the exact opposite. So yeah, I understand why Hamas is popular. In the eyes of Palestinians, they're seen as the more effective. They're seen as the more effective government, or the more effective government using a more effective form of resistance.
You mentioned earlier that you're agnostic, and what's interesting is the biggest blind supporters of Israel's actions are not actually the Jews. It's the evangelical Christian West.
Very much so, yeah. Most Zionists are not Jewish, right? Because there's not many of us. We're only 15 million globally. I'd say probably 12 million of that 15 million, these are rough estimates, are Zionists. But I mean, how many evangelicals are in the U.S.? More than that.
70, 80 million, right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So just in the U.S. alone, you have more non-Jewish Zionists than all the Jewish Zionists in the world, which is interesting. I don't know what to make of it. You know, I respect people's right to be religious as long as their religious beliefs are not infringing on the rights of others, you know.
What is the sentiment in Israel, like on the ground?
Well, the IDF is by far the most revered institution in Israeli society. So the IDF is still very much supported by the majority of the Israeli population. Netanyahu is not supported by the majority. He's actively supported by 20 to 30% of the Israeli population. So even when there's failures in Gaza, IDF war crimes, that's for the most part blamed on Netanyahu and his cabinet and not on the IDF. Although there's not much discussion on the war crimes being committed in Gaza. That's the Overton window in Israeli media and Israeli society is very narrow. You don't really have a left, not in the mainstream media. You have a far right all the way to the center. You know, maybe slightly left of center, but very little discussion, and it's changed a little bit in recent months, but there's very little discussion on war crimes being committed. The self-critique is not of how we're treating Palestinians. It's more so domestic issues. We're big on self-critique, just not how we treat Palestinians. Self-critique is judicial reform, corruption, stuff like that. Now, if you want to go a little bit deeper, because you started your question with anti-Semitism, so that's sentiment in the Israeli public. Overwhelmingly not supportive of Netanyahu, overwhelmingly no longer supporting the war in Gaza, right? The majority of Israelis want a ceasefire deal. They want to end it. Netanyahu and the IDF is no longer in support of it. The military brass is not in support of it. Netanyahu and his cabinet are, right? So you have a huge division now, and it's the first time in Israel history where the IDF is carrying out a mission that they do not support. So that's pretty interesting. On the question of anti-Semitism, I mentioned earlier, there's no world in which Israel's actions and the wide Jewish support for these actions don't fuel anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism has existed for thousands of years, long before Israel. One of the reasons why Israel exists is because of anti-Semitism, right? So I don't describe the reason for anti-Semitism being Israel. Anti-Semitism is a fire that's raged for thousands of years. Israel's actions is fuel to that fire. I think that's a suitable analogy. But a lot of anti-Semitism is just rooted in conspiracy and belief that we're trying to dominate and enslave the Gentiles.
Control the world.
Yeah, and control the world. And this, we just need a better education, better conversations. I don't think just assuming the worst about these people is the solution. I think we actually need to engage them and try to change their minds. I think that's probably more effective. But then there's another thing that fuels anti-Semitism that I don't have a good solution for. We Jews are disproportionately powerful, right? We don't control the world, but we control a larger share of the world than we represent.
Yes, but so what?
Right. Well, right. So this isn't a coordinated effort. This is just us doing well, right? We don't sit around and say,
hang on. Let me interrupt you and jump in and give you a parallel. Here in South Africa, white people are the minority, right? And white people are in a lot of positions of power.
Right. And that creates animosity.
Yes.
It shouldn't, but it does, right? So that's my whole point. If we're all psychologically healthy, you're like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to blame all Jews because they're doing well. That's, they're doing well. But innately, people have a response of some kind of disdain when they see that. So when, we're 0.2% of the global population, but our global influence is far greater than 0.2. So, and now let's zoom into the United States, because here I think it's relevant. The Jews in the United States are very overrepresented in media positions, in Hollywood, in finance, in high tech.
Banking.
Yep. And even porn, in the porn industry as well. Not porn. Yeah, I don't know if you know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
A rabbi bought Pornhub.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that there's the fund that bought Pornhub. A rabbi is part of that fund, but he's not the largest shareholder. But yeah, that's one thing that anti-Semites like to bring up. Now, these are all industries of consequence, right? There are other industries where Jews are overrepresented, but they're not industries of consequence. So in America, Jews are overrepresented in owning construction companies. These are primarily Israeli Jews. We're also overrepresented in charity donations. We're overrepresented in Nobel Peace Prizes. So we're overrepresented in many things, but the industries that I mentioned are all industries that shape culture. So if you're an American, And I think this is probably more relevant to right-wing anti-Semitism, but if you're an American and you don't like the direction of the country, you don't like what the financial system's doing, you don't like how the mainstream media is acting, you don't like the degeneracy that comes from porn, like, okay, well, Jews are in all those industries. Clearly, Jews are pulling the country in the wrong direction, right? That is a very natural interpretation of what's going on. I don't think it's the right interpretation because all these industries, even though Jews are overrepresented, we're not the majority in any of them. These are not entirely Jewish industries. And again, this just points to a small fraction of the Jewish population who occupy these positions in these industries. So what I think the solution is, and this is the solution to all forms of group hate, treat people as individuals. Even if you have prejudice towards Jews or prejudice towards blacks or prejudice towards Muslims, prejudice is natural. I don't think it's even reasonable to try to get rid of all prejudice. So that's not the goal. The goal is accepting prejudice as innate, but not acting on that prejudice. So you can have a bias, but if you meet an individual, treat them with dignity and respect. And if we all treat people with dignity and respect, I think we would live in a much more beautiful world. So that's what I really think the solution to this is. And Jews are going to continue to be disproportionately powerful for many generations. And this is something that, I think will always fuel anti-Semitism. And I think the solution is not to deplatform or cancel people who are troubled by this. It's not for Jews to just give up their power. It's for us to just treat people with dignity and respect.
Someone said to me a few days ago, after I shared before and after visual of a part of Gaza where it looked like a normal city and now it looks just like rubble. And the comment was, well, sorry, but that's what happens in a war.
Yeah, I think it's a war against Hamas, but I'm very okay with the framing. It's a war against Hamas and a genocide against the Palestinian people. And again, I already spoke about how I use the terminology, but I don't accept saying this is just a war because that is just a way to excuse human rights abuses and war crimes, right? It's not just a war, right? You can't hide behind that. No, there's the mass killing of civilians. There's the destruction of the way of life of civilians, of vital civilian infrastructure. There's a low degree of care for civilian life. We can't just hide behind, it's just a war.
I'm guessing you're optimistic.
Yeah, it can't hurt to be optimistic, And even if I'm not feeling internally optimistic, I present as optimistic because I realize it's good for the world to be optimistic. But when I speak realistically, no, I mean, we might be headed towards... like AI might kill us all, like that's possible. So I can't tell you that if that will happen or not, but I do think living a life of optimism and trying to fight the good fight just increases the chance that we survive as a species. So that's how I decide to live. Like I think the good way, the healthiest form of activism is a combination between idealism and pragmatism. Idealism being the vision you would like to create for the world, pragmatism being how can we actually get there, right? So call it idealism is the compass, pragmatism is the steering wheel.
I see a huge amount of critique against the Jews, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. But I never actually know where they're going with this. Like, okay, fine. You've made that point. Now what?
That's a great point. And I think it's much easier to talk about what we perceive to be a problem and not a solution, right? Solutions are much harder than identifying problems. So people reflexively are seeing something they don't like or are troubled with, and they're talking about it, but it's not like they're talking about, I mean, the extremists do have a solution, get Jews out of society, like Hitler had a solution. There's people who occasionally come with a solution. They're often pretty horrific solutions. But I'm seeing very little conversation about what is like a just solution? Okay, if you have concern that there's this insular ethnic group that is disproportionately powerful and they're bringing the country in a direction you don't like, well, hating an entire people and harming that people is not a legitimate solution. So let's actually talk about what you think the solution. How can we build better ties? How can we create a system where Jews are more integrated in society and where they're not seen as a separate part of society, right? Because the more we're hated, the more we stick together. The more we stick together, the more we're hated. We're kind of in the cycle. Yeah, there's a cycle. So as I mentioned, I do want to get into more of this type of work, interacting with anti-Semites. And this is going to be part of what I talk to them about. Is like, what do you actually think should be done? And just having a very real conversation about how we could heal the relationship between Jews and the Gentiles that currently don't like us.
All right, well, let's come in for a landing. How can my audience follow you?
Sure. So I am most active. My most in-depth and nuanced commentary is going to be on YouTube, but I do live streams once to twice a week. Anywhere from me moderating a debate, being in a debate, discussion, or just doing commentary. And then in addition to that, I'm quite active on X as well as on Instagram.
Dar Weinreb, thank you for joining me in the trenches.